Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they especially got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm so delighted to be here with you again this week. Wow, so much is always going on in those reflections, those mirrors of history just take and push this stuff right back into our faces. If we only knew our history, if we only understood what the founders intended, what they expected. Well, we're going to talk about some of that today. And being a good anti-federalist, I am going to take and talk about the convention, the Constitutional Convention. The convention of all conventions. Yes, I am. I'm going to bring you up to speed and up to date because what we have going on in our modern time are a couple of different things. One of the areas that we're going to touch on is the president's authority. And trust me, it's always long. But the debates were very dynamic around what the president could do, what he couldn't do, associations, and then it even went into the association relationship that could happen around the judiciary. And quite frankly, when it was brought up, they were pretty upset. Some of the men were very upset that you had these characters bringing this idea of this judiciary stuff back up. Now, I will tell you that it's very obvious when Wilson, whom I've read his commentaries on the Constitution, wrote those. So interesting in that I can understand him being a federalist and wanting a large government because when you listen to, or can't listen to it, you got to read it, the arguments that he makes during the convention, especially those areas around the presidency and the judiciary, one gets to understand then how in modern times some of the interpretations started moving forward in the way they did. And we take it, and that was a purposeful, we take it right back to that period of time when, let's see, we had a shift in Supreme Court justices under whom, none other than John Adams, not Sam Adams, John Adams. And John Adams, being the good puppet federalist that he was, poor guy, he should have listened to his cousin a whole lot more. He would have done a lot better, especially into the presidency. But he was connived into being a federalist. And even when you read what he wrote about the Constitution and some of his other theories, one has to say that he was definitely a aristocratic-minded, not as Sam Adams was a man of the people. But let's get it started. Let's get this started and get the show on the road, as they may say. And where we're going to start the show on the road is we're going to jump over to July 21st of 1787. And there's a gentleman by the name of Gouverneur Morris, who I really liked. He was really good in a lot of these arguments. I'm going to jump to a latter or end, if you will, paragraph in here. And Gouverneur Morris and the arguments that they were having around the Supreme, or the court, the judicial system. And one of the things that was very interestingly put forth was that he was talking about, and Gouverneur Morris, some check being necessary on the legislature. The question is in what hands it should be lodged. That's good. On the one side, it was contended that the executive alone ought to exercise it. He did not think that an executive appointed for 6 years and impeachable while in office should be very effectual check on the legislature. On the other side, it was urged that it ought to be the Judiciary Department. Against this, it was objected that expositors of law ought to have no hand in making them, and arguments in favor of this had been drawn from England. Well, he brings it out and talks about the truth of it is that in England, that was a bad argument in trying to say that the judges, on the legislative side of things, and that they would be a check. It was a bad argument because he goes, look, you guys aren't really paying attention to what's going on there, and you haven't learned your history to some extent, because if you take and you look at it, there are those in England that share in legislation. They are consulted in difficult and doubtful cases. They may be, and some of them, members of the legislature. Wow, how convoluted is that? They are only the members of the Privy Council, or there are some that are the Privy Council, and it advised the executive, being the king, to do what he wants to do. The influence of English judges may have in the latter capacity in strengthening the king in all of his influences and his dictates in the law, which was some of the things that we argued during the Revolution, was that when the judiciary was started to be taken over and paid for by the king, it was no longer independent, but became a servant of the king. So, what does it mean to have an independent judiciary? Well, he was extremely apprehensive that the auxiliary firmness and weight of the judiciary would not supply deficiency. He concurred in thinking that the public liberty in greater danger from the legislature usurpation than from the other source. It had been said that the legislature ought to be relied on as the proper guardians of liberty, and he said the answer was short and conclusive. Either bad laws will be pushed or not. On the latter supposition, no check will be wanted. On the former, a strong check will be necessary. And this is the proper supposition. Emissions, and he's talking about the things that would be pushed by the legislature. Get this. Emission of paper money, largeness to the people, or special favors to the people, a remission of debts, and similar measures will at some time be popular and will be pushed for that reason. At other times, such measures will coincide with the interest of the legislature themselves, and that will be a reason not less from pushing them. It may be thought that the people will not be deluded and misled in the latter case. Really? Here's one for you, and just think about this. Here's one for you. This is one that I put up on Twitter and a couple other places this week, is that this statement is very interesting in relationship to what President Trump says very often. So here we have is the people won't be deluded, right? You're not going to be deluded, and not going to miss out on the fact that the legislature is really trying to shove stuff at you that, really isn't good. A lot of it's self-serving, and a lot of it is from special interest as well. Well, let's get to here. He says, but experience teaches another lesson. So experience teaches that the people will be deluded. The legislature will shove down our throats those things that they want for themselves. And not only that, they will take and listen to the special interests and shove all these other things down. Or they won't give us what we need for national security. So here's the Trumpism, if you will. So here it goes. Are you ready? The press, and this is Gouverneur Morris saying this on July 21st, the press is indeed a great means of diminishing the evil. Yet it is found to be unable to prevent it altogether. So the press at the time was supposed to be that component, and the protection of the press became very important as we look at, after the Constitution, because the Constitution of '87 never gave any guarantees of freedom of the press. So when we look at then the amendments that come into play, that is one of the amendments that came into play, is that about the freedom of the press. But here he's saying, okay, the press is supposed to be diminishing the evil, and yet we know that it can't prevent it altogether. Well, here we have just quite the contrary in so many ways compared to what they were talking about here and what Gouverneur Morris was talking about. Instead, what we have is the press being the purveyor, the purveyor of evil. Those that have taken and completely sided with the legislature and sided with all of that that is predominantly anti-constitutional. I mean, it's right here just in the arguments alone and what they have to say. So just in looking at this very section, and this is July 21st, Judiciary, the veto and separation of powers is what the argument was all about. You know, it was talking here again that Wilson was proposing that there would be great reflection. The judiciary ought to have an opportunity of remonstrating against projected encroachments on the people as well as on themselves. It had been said that judges, as expositors of the laws, would have an opportunity of defending their constitutional rights. There was weight in this observation, but this power of the judges did not go far enough. And that was Wilson's whole thing with the judiciary. Wilson thought that the judiciary should have a whole lot more power. He writes about that in his commentaries on the Constitution. And it's one of the frustrating things. He says some good stuff in there, but some of the frustrating things is that his take on the judiciary has always been a very powerful judiciary, to which we have seen that the enemies of the Constitution have taken that and made that their case, and to the extent that they make the case that, you know, they should be able to legislate from the bench. But we always go back to, wow, very interesting. So he says also is that laws may be unjust, may be unwise, may be dangerous, may be destructive, and yet may not be so unconstitutional as to justify the judges in refusing to give them effect. Let them have a share in the revisionary power, and they will have an opportunity of taking notice of these characteristics of law and of counteracting by the weight of their opinions the improper views of the legislature. So, ladies and gentlemen, you see right from the beginning, judicial review, to the extent of a philosophical perspective, was brought out by Wilson, and he really drove that point home in his whole belief system when it came time to write his commentaries on the Constitution. What do I have left, Kath? About a minute? 2.5 minutes. Wow, we have a lot of time here, folks. So in this 2.5 minutes, let's kind of wrap this one up, is that the ideas of judicial activism did not get so taken out of the philosophical arguments of those during the convention. Actually, they were latent. They were waiting. They were waiting for someone to take and bring them forward and take and move them into place and point back and say, oh yeah, you guys want to argue about original intent, originalism. Well, there it is. Look what Wilson has to say. And he was there. He was, talking about originalism. How much more do you want from there? No, we know that that's not true. The judiciary is not supposed to legislate. But once again, when you have a disease that is latent, at some point in time, it's going to come out. And then again, what Gouverneur Morris was saying, the expectation that a free and honest press, ooh, that's scary. Where are we going to find a free and honest press? Because we even see the Fox network taking that twist because of the Murdochs. It's taking that twist to where? The left, which is your right, my left, and they're going down that path. And the expectation, as we kind of heard, we thought would happen, is that you, the people, would not be deluded and misled. So to keep from your delusion, which obviously you are, and to not be misled, you have to learn. You have to take and study. You have to read the fundamental documents for yourself, or hopefully I can take and try and bring some of it forward for you. But you know what? I'm just a guy that's reading it and giving my opinion on it. But you know something? It really was. It was Samuel Adams who understood how our nation should move forward. And yes, those anti-federalists, in arguing against this, they did. They absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And I'm so delighted once again to be here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where Liberty works for you. And there's a lot of great programming going on all during the week. A couple of things I want to mention is, as I always do in this segment, hey, you know what? Go check out the rest of the website there at lwrn.net or libertyworksradio.com. You know what? There's a lot of good hosts, a lot of good hostesses, good programming, live programming all during the week. And there is there that donate button. It is. This is listener funded, and it is up to you to help keep this programming going alive and well, and playing back the archives of other folks too. So with that, a couple things I want you to know is that those that don't get the newsletter, I'd really appreciate if you would go to samueladamsreturns.net, and there on the left-hand side, down on the bottom of the left-hand side of the page, if you scroll down there, you'll see that you can sign up. There's a form there that you can sign up for the newsletter or other interested aspects regarding Samuel Adams Returns. And in that, you'll get a lot of good information. The other thing that's very important for you to know is that we are now past the midway point for the chaplains and clergy of the revolution. I'm telling you, you know what, I'm telling you that I don't believe that pastors and church leaders will be willing to read this book, watch the videos and the things that I'm doing for my grandkids. And I'm doing this for my grandkids because they'll never, ever, ever get this information anywhere else. The important part is that church leaders and pastors won't read this book. So if you're a church leader or a pastor listening to this program, you know what? I don't dare people to do things because I think that's silly. I will encourage you, but I have the greatest doubts ever that you will go read or pay attention to that book, the chaplains and clergy of the revolution, because you know why? For the majority of pastors and lay people out there, so-called lay leaders, it will throw your theology so far out of kilter that you just won't be able to stand it. So anyway, I'm sure that, I'm sorry. Those that are listening to this program, you're right. I'm sure that it wouldn't throw your theology that far off, but I guarantee you, it'll make you think, why aren't I preaching from the pulpit? I was, the last chapter I just put up yesterday, chapter 25 on John Gano. You know something? The army troops begged him to preach on political things. Go figure that one. They wanted to hear God's truth and word, that there's no separation between political life, government, and God. If you haven't read Ezekiel and you haven't read Jeremiah, if you haven't read, all the Lamentations, if you haven't read, the Old Testament, then you're missing it. And the reality is that many people that read the New Testament miss it because they don't reference the Old Testament. And one of the things that I always say, and then we're going to get on to July 17th of 1787, 17th and 19th, actually. One thing I always say is that, Jesus was very political. People, no, he wasn't. Jesus wasn't political. He preached love. He preached, he challenged sin. He did all of that. I'm going to say it over and over. Who were the Jewish leaders? Who were they? Who were the Sadducees and the Pharisees? Oh, they were the teachers. They taught. They were the priests. They were this. They were that. Oh, the priests, the scribes. Who were all of they? Who were they? Did you ever hear of a thing called the Sanhedrin? Yeah. They were members of the ruling body. They were members of the political body. And when Jesus called them out, he wasn't calling them out just for their religious actions, inactions, and disbelief. What he was calling them out for was their evil and leading the people astray, misleading them, deceiving them, leading them into deception. You see that over and over again in the Old Testament. So God always judged and called out those religious leaders that dissected or removed themselves from the cultural and political perspective, or worse, perverted the cultural and political perspectives of a nation. So we're not just talking about Israel. Go see what happens in Ezekiel, or I want to see Jeremiah about Egypt. Oh, really? Ezekiel about Egypt. Go look at the Old Testament and how the other nations, Babylon, so on and so, Daniel and oh, you know what? Figure it. Anyway, enough on that. Quick lesson. So go, please. It's a tab at samueladamsreturns.net. At the top of the page, up there in the menu item, is the chaplains and clergy. Check it out. All of that to say, go check out the page. There's more there. And that one is continuously being updated, which reminds me, as I'm talking to you, I'm talking to myself, is I got to go update that little menu on chapter 25. But it's on YouTube, so you can find it on YouTube really easy. So let's get to some of this stuff. And I'm going to jump around in here. And this is on the election and term of office of the national executive. It was really a hard decision to try and figure out how long should someone be elected to the presidency for? What's their job? What's their duty? What are they all about? What's going on with all of this? And Gouverneur Morris, he jumped in right off the beginning, and he was talking about in comparisons to people and those that were in the executive branch in New York and Connecticut and all of that. And he says if the people should elect, they will never fail to prefer some man of distinguished character or service, some man, if he might so speak, of continental reputation. If the legislature elect, it will be the work of intrigue, of cabal, of faction. It will be like the election of a pope by conclave of cardinals. Real merit will rarely be the title to the appointment. He moved to strike out national legislature to insert citizens of the United States. So what we have going on right now when we talk about this debate, and you have, in this case, the communist, socialist, leftist, progressives, whatever you want to call them, wanting to rid themselves of the Electoral College, this is where they got it out of the debates. So a lot of these folks, realistically, this is why in education, they don't want children, they don't want you, they don't want people in college to understand these founding arguments, except for the bits and pieces that they find useful for themselves to say, oh, but the Constitution means this, and pervert the truth and the total ideas of this. Because, let's look at it. I know I do that clicking noise, and I usually pull that out, but you know what? Sometimes it's just fun. A little extra emphasis for you. Mr. Sherman gets into this whole thing, and he's talking about that the nation. So first off, the people. So Gouverneur Morris is saying, you know what? It should be elected by the body of the people. But now we're going to get into this debate. And in this debate, what's going to happen is they're going to say, well, wait a minute. You're going to have all these people all over the U.S. How is it going to be communicated effectively and efficiently the character, the true character of the person that will hold the highest office, if you will, in the land. And he goes on to talk about that by the people at large. He was saying that this is crazy. This is Mr. Sherman. He says the latter will never be sufficiently informed of characters, and besides will never give a majority of votes to any one man. They will generally vote for some man in their own state, and the largest state will have the best chance for the appointment. If the choice made by the legislature, a majority of voices may be made necessary to constitute an election. So the point that Sherman was trying to bring out is that you're never going to understand the whole character, regardless of the media, regardless of TV. And what was important at that time, there were no political parties. There were no political parties. So the argument that was going on was under the assumption that every state, and what Sherman was saying, you'd have all these people that are saying, this is my guy. Oh, this is my guy. This is my guy. And because of the way that the vote was initially designed to work, is that no political parties. Get it? And therefore, you didn't have all of this nonsense and taking to try and get, the dog at the remainder of the dog meat that comes out of the pile of the dog fight. All right. So what also the parties have done, as Washington says, is just caused the intrigue and cabal that they were trying to stop. All right. Here we go. So then, Mr. Wilson, once again, he jumps right in. He has two arguments against an election of the executive by the people, which just was kind of interesting. And again, he is an aristocrat, and he's trying to develop that. He says, one, he wants you to look at Poland, and you look at all of the different things, and he goes through all the arguments of what happened in Poland and how the Polish people would go in and they would elect, but then the Polish nobles have the resources, and they would sit there outside with clubs, spears, knives, forks, and everything else to persuade you how to vote. Kind of sounds like Venezuela, doesn't it? The Maduro sitting there, and oh my. So who shows up to vote? Only those that can be persuaded to show up to vote. So Poland had its real problems, although they talk a lot about the Polish Republic in other areas. Now, we get into this whole thing is that Mr. Pinckney, he gets into it and talks about it and bringing it forward. An election by the people being liable to the most obvious and striking objections. They will be led by a few active and designing men, and the most populous states combining in the favor of the same individual. Oh my goodness gracious. They didn't even have political parties, and they figured out that you would have crumb bums, designing men and women that would take and try to push forward their Hillary. Their, that's it. Their Hillary. And others like that. They would push forward the evil that would do the country damage for their own purposes and gain and everything else. So Pinckney brought that out. And he said the most populous states would then perform those actions and push forward those people over the opportunity of the less populated states. So this is very interesting because what does it do? It shows once again in our present day that reflection in the mirror is that the populous areas, the communist left and the communist east coasts of greatest population, they can very easily, by population perspectives, generate a lot of votes. And then they pick up some of the other popular vote in between. If it was all by popular vote, we would have a destructive environment, as Mr. Pinckney brings out, in that they would what? We would have a few designing people, led by a few active and designing people, to bring forth a president. Let's think about all of the money now and influence into the political parties that is going on. Then we got to go back, and we'll jump back into it in the next segment, because there's so much more just in this alone as to who does what relative to those powers as Samuel Adams returns. And yes, those anti-federalists, they got it absolutely right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again. Once again, I'm so delighted that you're with me for this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. This is Tom Navulis, your host, and we are seeing in this program some of the greatest reflections in the mirrors of history that one can look at. And it's not like, Alice in Wonderland looking in the mirror type thing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what was argued and why the anti-federalists argued to put in different protections and argued against aspects of this Constitution in talking about the judiciary. Brutus from New York, who was there at the Constitution, not by that name, but I'll let you go back to some of the archive programs to figure out who Brutus was, or go look him up and get an understanding that he was there. He was the head of the delegation for New York, and he actually pulled the delegation out, as I've told you many times before, because he saw that this Constitution could become what we're living under today. That's why I wrote the book. You got it here. From covenant to the present Constitution, because what's operating as the present Constitution, well, it wasn't what they argued and intended here. But anyway, you can go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net and order the book. So, let's press on. Gouverneur Morris, he brought out a few things about the people of such states cannot combine. If there be any combination, it must be among the representatives in the legislature. It is said people will be led by a few designing men. This might happen in small districts. It can never happen throughout the continent. In the election of the governor of New York, it is sometimes the case in particular spots that the activities and intrigues of little partisans are successful. But the general voice of the state is never influenced by what? By such artifice. Yes. It is said that the multitude will be uninformed. It is true, they will be uninformed of what passed in the legislature conclave if the election were to be made there. But they will not be uninformed of those great illustrious characters which have merit, their esteem and confidence. I like Gouverneur Morris, but there's times that I just sit there and, I wish, sir, you had the opportunity to really see into the future instead of just this little narrow thing that you were looking at, and too much confidence in the people, too much confidence in what would happen when, especially, as I always say, when the pulpits gave up teaching what virtue, morality, and that bringing together of those into governance, when the churches and the pulpits quit teaching that, well, Gouverneur Morris had a good idea and probably would have been true if we could have maintained a moral and virtuous people, which we don't have. We have socialists and communists and progressives and humanists and all the other ists, and now we have a jihadist sitting in Congress. Anyway, so Gouverneur Morris, that was pretty good. But no peanuts for you, sir. Mason brings out some interesting ideas, and he was talking about some of those other observations, what would happen, talking about the president, being the guy that would make some appointments, talking about the polls again, and what happened with the election of their first magistrate, so on and so forth. Then we get old Gouverneur Morris. He talks about, once again, he calls this idea, he calls it a maxim. It has been a maxim in political science and Republican government is not adapted to a large extent of country because the energy of the executive magistracy cannot reach the extreme parts of it. Our country is an extensive one, became one. Remember, they only had 13 colonies up and down the East Coast. We must either then renounce the blessing of union or provide an executive with sufficient vigor to pervade every part of it. The subject was of such importance that he, being Gouverneur Morris, and remember this was Madison that was writing these notes on this, hoped to be indulged in the extensive view of it. One great object of the executive is to control the legislature. The legislature will continually seek to aggrandize, and produce by war, or aggrandize and perpetuate themselves. Sorry, I had to reread that. So some of the things that were taken in the notes by Madison that Gouverneur Morris was bringing out is that the executive probably should have a little bit of good check on the legislature, because the legislature, as we see with Nancy Pelosi and Chucky Schumer, yeah. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be professional. Kathy, am I professional? She's over there laughing at me, you know. We have to have some fun, but the professionalness of all of this left the venue. And it only left the venues because everybody's stupid to the truth. Okay, enough said. Anyway, what we see is that the legislature will continually seek to aggrandize and perpetuate themselves, and will seize those most critical moments produced by war, invasion, or convulsions for that purpose. So let's stop right there, because there's so much more Gouverneur Morris was kind of interesting and correct about. But we have invasion, and what their legislature under the likes of Schumer and Pelosi are aggrandizing themselves, getting out there, and they have all the answers, and the wonderful, and the Democrats, and all of that. And the Republicans didn't do much better under the little puking progressive socialist Ryan. Anyway, and here it is, and they want to perpetuate themselves. How is it that now you have McConnell and Nancy Pelosi conniving to squash Ted Cruz's amendment to do what? To take and bring term limits in. How is it that you have somebody that gets elected for 2 years in for 20, 10 times, making a career out of it? The whole thing here that they're talking about, they want to perpetuate themselves. And they'll do it by, guess what? They have taken and created wars as much as any executive has, and they've allowed the likes of the State Department to do the same. But we won't go down that path. So let's stay right here in what's going on. So, you have Gouverneur Morris talking about it is necessary then that the executive should be the guard of the people. Even, Pelosi saying, oh, this is the people's house. We're the guard of the people. No, you're not. You're just, anyway. And let's see, even of the lower classes against legislative tyranny, against the great and the wealthy, who in the course of things will necessarily compose the legislative body. Okay. There's some people, like what's her name, the Cortez chick, she's a poor socialist, but she got all her money from Soros, MoveOn.org, and all of his other organizations. So I'm sure somewhere or another bills are picked up for her and all of that. But let's face it, a lot of these people that run for office are pretty darn good attorneys that already made good chunks of money. And how is it that the likes of Nancy Pelosi becomes a millionaire over the course of the last not just a millionaire, but a multi-millionaire over the course of the last 10 years? I guess everything that she made, starting out at 80, 90,000 a year, and now they're at 160 some thousand a year, whatever it is. I don't remember. I don't know. I don't pay attention to the exact number. So that means that every paycheck she put in a really good fund and getting some really great interest. Kathy just gave me the 5-minute mark, and here we are rocking and rolling in this last segment. the whole thing that Gouverneur Morris was saying, that there would be a check. There were other arguments as to no, the president shouldn't have all of that power on the legislature, that the legislature, they're kind of a better place to be the guardian of the people. And if here is, let me flip back here. Oh, this was Gouverneur Morris. I mean, he got on a roll with this whole thing on the 17th and 19th of July. And he's just talking about if it be known to the legislature, they must have a notoriety and eminence of character. Ha! They cannot possibly be unknown to the people at large. It cannot be possible that a man shall have sufficiently distinguished himself to merit this high trust without having his character proclaimed by fame throughout the empire regarding the president. And then he goes on to talk about this. And in the long discussion that ensues here, it comes down to the whole point that which we need is electors. Electors. That the electors, and this is where the Electoral College came from, is that the people will vote for electors within their various states in conjunction with the state legislature, so that those whom they know the best are closest to them being the state legislatures, not the national government. We should never have the national legislature doing anything except the way that it talks about the course in the Constitution, that if the president and vice president go away, how do you choose a new president and vice president? Okay, that's a process. But what's most important is in these arguments, the whole idea of electoral college came about because the idea was that there were no political parties. And you needed to understand the character of the person, and not necessarily would the character of the person be able to know campaigning. They didn't campaign. Everything happened in the press. You talk about the ugliest election ever. The ugliest election ever was between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The surrogates in the press were brutal. And the process of an electoral college works. Absolutely works. And for all the protections that they argue and talk about. That being the idea that the populous states cannot control the popular vote to the extent that then they, through manipulation, design, and everything else, will drive and determine the outcome. So if in effect we did not have the Electoral College, you would have Hillary Clinton today. Oh my, how scary that would be. Anyway, how scary it really would be. So the point is that what's your takeaway for today? Well, you can go read, the 17th, 19th, and 21st in the Constitutional Convention notes. That would be your first takeaway. Second takeaway is that you must take and get out and stop, number one, educate, and then stop any ideas whatsoever of getting rid of the Electoral College. There's movements in the state. There's been movements even by libertarians, and the biggest ones are the Koch brothers on this one. My dad always points that out. The Koch brothers and all of their ilk are wanting to get rid of the Electoral College. So I think it's real critical that as an action item, that you get out there. That's something that, just one thing of the many things to do is do a little research. I'm not going to do that for you. But I bet, especially in Maryland, a lot of the East Coast markets for this programming, yep, they're out there trying to push and tear apart our constitutional perspective on how we should elect somebody. And then, as much as I despise political parties, if you're not finding that place where you can fight, you better fight for our constitutional republic and find a place, whether it's a Tea Party or the Republicans, where you can support Donald Trump in 2020. So those are your action items. And guess what? Sam Adams understood everything about that, and that's why he'll be back next week. And the Anti-Federalists, they got it absolutely right.